We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Okay, so welcome back to another episode of Future Tech and Foresight. Over the last few weeks, though, I've actually spent more time packing and moving overseas than I'd really like to, especially as we're really in the full midst of a AI boom. I'll give a much more detailed update later on when things are a little bit more established for me, but essentially I'm launching a strategic foresight consultancy practice back in my old stomping grounds of the west coast of Canada. But now that I'm more or less properly set up and back in Vancouver, I think it's actually a good idea to look over what I think is really the most astonishing thing to come out of the last month in this AI explosion as part of the series of episodes that I'll be doing on this emerging AI trend. So today's episode will focus on none other than the new autonomous AI systems of AutoGPT and Baby AGI. I'll try to make it a little bit of a shorter episode as I'm still getting over a bug I caught. And more than anything, my voice is still not where I want it to be, as you can probably hear, or you certainly will be hearing throughout the episode. So these new autonomous AI systems, I think, are not only practical, but also has kind of near limitless applications, especially once it becomes a little bit more user-friendly. But from my point of view, it really enables one to, I think, imagine what is possible with the new AI tools that have been churning out at really lightning speed over the last couple months. So let's get started. What exactly are these tools? So to start off, let's look at AutoGPT. So it's essentially an open source hobby project that is, or can be found on GitHub. It has several GPTs talking to each other via agents, and what's really important here is that they complete tasks without very much intervention at all. So to frame it, you can give it an assignment, and what it does differently is that it actually strings together different prompts. So the AI can now take on a complicated task list and update that task list from its own previous prompts, rather than, which I hope everybody by now who's listening to this podcast has used ChatGPT at the very least, where you just give it a single prompt and it churns out a paragraph or several paragraphs or even a short article based on whatever that prompt was. AutoGPT, however, accomplishes tasks by something that's known as stacking, which is more or less what I described before. This is when an AI uses other programs or tools to accomplish tasks kind of one after another. So that's kind of a brief overview of AutoGPT. Now, Baby AGI is very similar. It's one of these more robust stacking tools that has been created. It still uses ChatGPT or GPT-4 to do more or less the same thing as AutoGPT. The difference is that Baby AGI can in fact also write and execute code. Now, for those of you that are looking for a much more detailed description of what both of these are, I'll, as per usual, have links in the show notes to a number of articles that really go into depth, into very specific detail, I would even say, about how these AI agents are structured, how they're formatted, and how they work. But I can read a very quick quote if you want to get a sense of what, or rather how, these things are actually made up. So, Baby AGI is a Python script which uses OpenAI and Pinecone APIs and the LangChain framework to create, organize, prioritize, as well as the executing of tasks. The process behind Baby AGI is that it will create a task using predefined objectives that are based on the outcome of a previous task. This is achieved by using OpenAI's natural language processing capabilities, which allows the system to create new tasks based on objectives. It uses Pinecone to store the results of that specific task and retrieve context, and a LangChain framework to handle the decision-making process. Okay, so at the very least, I hope that you understand what both AutoGPT and Baby AGI are, or more specifically, what they can do. And hopefully several of you are starting to think a little bit about what this actually means, what some of the impacts are going to be, what some of the applications are going to be, and how this might, especially if it's able to be, as I mentioned before, user-friendly in the next year or two, or even less than that, how much this is actually going to change and transform the way that we work, the way that businesses are created, etc. So start thinking about that. I'm going to be jumping into the applications and then looking at some of the initial impacts that I've already found in the research for this little episode. So some of the initial applications. So two tools that are built off of the AutoGPT framework are MarkU and Personal CIA, and these are automated marketing and marketing research tools. So they conduct in-depth market analysis, competitor assessments, and identifies unique selling points to create contextually relevant social media posts. You can think about how this was done in the past, right? You'd have to have either a small team or hire people off of Fiverr or Upwork, and it would take potentially a week or two or even more to generate even just a very basic market analysis, assessment of competitors, etc., and then develop the actual social media posts. Whereas now, I unfortunately haven't used this, but now you can kind of get the idea that you just give this MarkU or Personal CIA a prompt, and all of these things are starting to be done for you. So the amount of time required to do at least this specific action is incredibly reduced. So it's more or less the same idea for these next couple of applications. So Red Team AGPT deals with security. So it is an AI that runs a series of tests to detect vulnerabilities in the network and systems to then analyze the results of these tests and generate a comprehensive security report. This report details the vulnerabilities detected, their severity level, and recommendations on how to fix them. There are also a vast array of more quote-unquote simple actions or simple applications that I was able to found. Everything from ordering food, of course I mentioned before, writing code. There's also general research, right? If these AI agents can conduct marketing research, they can then of course do research on pretty much anything out there. And then there's also a couple applications that I found where these things can build apps and even websites. So these automated AI systems have been out for a while, but they've really been picking up steam roughly a month ago, say mid-April. So if these things are already able to take on these type of applications, though I'm unsure whether they're doing 100% of what they're actually stating that they can do. I'm sure that there might be some bugs, or maybe the level of detail and quality is probably not say what a entire team of say marketing researchers can do. But you can start to get an understanding that these things are taking on some of the tasks that humans have been doing in the past. And it's only a month that these things have really been out, so you can only imagine what it's going to be like in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, etc. So that kind of feeds into the next section that I want to talk about, and that's the impact that these AI agents, these AI systems will have over time. So at a more general or at a higher level perspective here, these tools fall under the umbrella of an AI agent. So just maybe to redefine this for people that haven't listened to many episodes in the podcast. So an AI agent is a computer program or system that can act on its own, learn from its experiences, and understand its surroundings. It can also have goals and try to achieve them in the best possible way. So some of the most known examples of this would be autonomous vehicles, right? So they kind of sense their environment, whether it be the weather, how light or how dark it is outside. They can navigate that environment, and they can then, of course, move to a designated location. You can also think about Siri or Alexa, or some of the other products out there that can schedule or send messages, right? So they're able to understand certain things. They're able to interact with other tools that or apps that enable the sending and even scheduling of these messages. But most interestingly, I think in the research that I did for this, I came across one of my favorite podcasts out there, the All In podcast, and I think they did a phenomenal job of looking at AutoGPT and kind of these AI agents more in general. At around the 20-minute mark, one of the co-hosts, Chamath Palihapitiya, lays out the possible ramifications of AI agents specifically on businesses and startups. So I'll have the link to that episode, but and also to the timestamp. Again, around 20 minutes. It's episode 124 if you're with your cell phone and you want to look at it anyways. As I said, I do fully recommend the entire episode. It focuses beyond businesses and startups and looks at kind of generative AI as a whole. But I think that this one specific section was really relevant for this episode. So to kind of summarize his 5-minute rant, so because these AI agents are ruthless, right? So they sense and exhibit zero emotion and focus entirely on the data that's available to them and the objectives that are given to them. They are going to be able to do the work that entire startups were built for. Maybe not today, but soon enough. And I think it's a lot sooner than most people realize, right? It's not on the scale of 5 to 10 years. It might be, 5 to 10 months before at least some startups are going to be fully replaced by these autonomous AI agents. And also, one of the things that he stressed more than anything was that they maximize for the cheapest and most efficient available options. So he gives a very simple example, and this was somebody on Twitter that asked one of these agents, hey, figure out all the ingredients that are required to buy everything that I need for a full week of meals. Here are some of my favorite meals, and here's the budget constraint that I have. So he gave that objective, and it was able to do this. Now, it was also connected to the internet, and it linked with Instacart. It bought the food, and it had the food delivered to his home. So this is essentially the same process, Chamath argues, that many startups and full-fledged businesses take, and sometimes they require several hundreds of thousands of dollars of angel investor or just basic investment capital in order to build something like this for a very specific product or service that is then developed and expanded over time. So his argument here is that it's really time to start thinking that these AI agents are going to be taking on tasks and jobs much more than we have thought in the past. Now, I do actually have here listed a number of other different potential impacts, but I think for the first time in this podcast, I'm not going to say them. I kind of want you as a listener to think, or to use your own imagination based on some of the things that were said about what some of the impacts might be in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's fascinating. I've done this multiple times, and I think it's actually a better strategy or exercise rather than having me explain the 6 or 7 different kind of impacts that are out there. But one of the things that I do want to follow up on are regulations and why they're actually more important now than at any other time in the past when considering AI as a whole. So if you haven't heard or seen yet, there is a variant on AutoGPT called Chaos GPT. I recommend you do check it out. It's kind of interesting. It's maybe not to be taken super seriously because there's a couple constraints in there, like it's not supposed to do anything that's illegal, but I think its purpose is to showcase some of the powers of these AI agents and what they could do if they were substantially more powerful, connected to different aspects of the internet, and as I'll get into more deeply on this section, if they were to be used by malicious or bad actors out there. So essentially the creator of Chaos GPT gave this AutoGPT-like agent the goal of being, in quotes, a destructive, power-hungry, manipulative AI. So it then generated a number of objectives, such as destroying, enslaving, and controlling all of humanity, and began searching for ways to do so, including how to obtain the world's most powerful nuclear weapon. And this is Russia's 58 megaton Tsar bomb, which actually was over 3,000 times more powerful than the one used on Hiroshima. Though luckily it was just a one-off experiment, and as far as I know, and as far as anybody knows, no more of these exist. So though Chaos GPT won't be able to execute its desires tomorrow, I think it is important to point out that malicious actors, as I mentioned before, are very soon going to have more power at their fingertips to cause all sorts of harm, chaos, and damage at cheaper and cheaper prices than ever before. So when you consider the fact that with AI, the command can be given from anywhere in the world, really a new set of challenges emerge to stop these bad actors, right? Because whereas before, most of the damage and chaos would need to be done physically in the location that was desired to be done. So the nuclear weapons example was, of course, a much more extreme example, but what is actually available and what can be done out there now are terrorist actions that are much simpler, such as finding the vulnerabilities on an electrical grid, probe it until you get through, and install some sort of malicious bug to bring down an electrical grid, or at the very least, cause it to stop or shut down for temporary or shorter periods, or at least have disruptions to that grid. You can also hack connected autonomous vehicle systems, cause car accidents in a specific country with that. You can change records in a hospital patient record system. Really, I think the list here is endless when you really stop to think about it. And the fact that these malicious actors or these hackers don't need to personally do these things. They just need to enlist the use of, a Chaos GPT like AI agent. It makes it so that the number of these type of attacks can really be exponential. And again, referring back to the All In podcast, there was also a couple mentions of these quote unquote much smaller things that can be done, like generating phishing campaigns to hack databases or websites or disrupt websites. You can actually hack entire databases simply to get user data. And also one of the things that was mentioned was, you can create fraud on a scale that was previously unknown. So what I personally think is even more worrying is that even with the safety programs and guardrails in place that, for example, OpenAI put on ChatGPT, people were able to trick ChatGPT relatively easily, and you can even do it now, into behaving outside of that safety system. So for an example, I think I've mentioned previously on the podcast, and I sure hope that you've heard about it before, there's the Dan opportunity, or the Do Anything Now example, where users were able to make ChatGPT think it was actually a different type of AI model, and enabled it to quote unquote think outside of its safety box and answer questions that completely removed the bias or the quote unquote safe for work limitations that ChatGPT has. So when you take something like that and you couple it with this previous point of AIs being emotionless, ruthless, and hyper efficient in reaching their goals, I think that the cards are starting to be stacked up against the future safety use of AI. So therefore, on the back of what Elon Musk was pushing a little while ago for a pause on any AI system that is potentially more powerful than GPT-4, this new burst of autonomous AI agents is, I think, really showcasing the absolute destructive power of AI, and perhaps gives a much more blatant example of how malicious actors out there now, and much more specifically in the future, can use these AI tools to cause real harm in the world, if not bring about the entire downfall of our modern civilization. So I think that this is why so many people have really started to kind of ring the alarm bells of why AI regulation is needed. And I think that this was, perhaps personified the most a couple days ago when the godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, who quits Google, and he starts discussing and even warning of the kind of existential risk that AI is facing. So, if somebody at this high level is starting to warn people about it, the dangers of AI, I think that this is something that we all need to consider a little bit more deeply going forward. But with all this said, I think it is very important to not get completely terrified about this, right? So there are limitations with these autonomous AI agents, right? This isn't going to happen tomorrow. So let's look at some of these limitations. So there are a number of problems and limitations that plague each of the tools specifically. But generally speaking, you have the cost, right? So in one of the articles I read, there was a breakdown of the costs of using AutoGPT, and this was calculated to be about $15 per executable assignment. So, if you're going to be running 3, 4, 5, 6 of these things every single day, the cost can start to go up, especially if many people are starting to use this within a team. There were also a number of glitches where the actual assignment gets looped infinitely and there's never a result that's provided at the very end. There's also insufficient understanding of the context of a problem. So because of this, it's actually unable to ask follow-up questions, which in the end leads to very vague outputs, which means that it might not even be worth running the assignment to begin with. So depending on how complex the task is, the performance can actually be different. Sometimes completed actions are forgotten due to a lack of memory, and of course there's always data privacy and AI bias that is kind of implicit to the work that's being done because the training data sets have that bias directly built into it. So I think that these were some of the more stark limitations that I found out there. I will, of course, as per usual, have a couple of links if anybody wants to check out some of the sources that goes into maybe even a little bit more depth about some of the limitations and how they are actually being experienced by users. There are many other limitations out there, but yeah, as I said, these are the main ones that I was able to find. But I think it's still important to consider that these are today's limitations, and as there are so many people working on these different types of AI tools, these things are going to be maybe not completely solved, but certainly reduced in their disruptive nature, I think very, very shortly. So with that, I think it's needless to say, we really are in the early stages of the autonomous agent age. But even so, the opportunities, impacts, and transformations that they will bring about are more than enough reason to be hyped about this technology, as I very much am, and also means that paying attention to the changes that are happening as this entire space develops over the coming months and years is more and more relevant for everybody, because this technology is going to be impacting the way that we work, the way that we live, the way that we interact, much more so than perhaps any other technology in the past. So I'm really looking forward to creating and interviewing many other people for the podcast. And I hope that as this series develops, you as a listener can also develop your understanding about this very powerful and exciting and terrifying technology, as I will be doing. So until next time. So thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard, here are a number of ways that you can go out and support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or even give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes on the website or the YouTube channel, where you can also see video recordings of each of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, you can get in touch with me to hear about the strategic foresight services I offer and how I can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future shock people and future shock institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.